Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. The network is home to podcasts about film, A24, Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, and a fantastic show called Missing Frames, which looks at films that people haven't got around to watching yet. And that's inspired today's episode. And joining me is returning guest star Carlos Miranda. Welcome back, Carlos.
Thanks, Lee. It's great to be back.
So, Carlos, there are 778 to date different Star Trek movies, episodes, and you've seen 777 of them, but one is outstanding. Can you tell us what one that is, Carlos?
One is definitely outstanding, and it is the series finale of Star Trek Enterprise, These Are The Voyages.
So, Carlos, you are an uber Star Trek nerd. You have spent money on conventions, photo shoots. You've been on this podcast numerous times talking about Star Trek. You have watched terrible episodes of Star Trek, no doubt, because we all have. You don't watch 777 episodes and not watch a few stinkers. Why have you not watched These Are The Voyages?
Okay, so one, there was originally a logistical reason, and the logistical reason is that I was living in London doing a master's at the time. And so it was 2000, when would that have been? 2005, right? When it aired. So I was doing a master's, and they didn't air Enterprise in London or in the UK. It was always a couple of days. It was always a couple of days later, and so I couldn't. It wasn't live, and I didn't have a television in the house that I lived in. So I would always have to download episodes, read into that as what you may. I always had to download episodes a couple of days after they aired in the US. And I couldn't find These Are The Voyages anywhere for whatever reason. Any file that I found, I couldn't really download. So I had this logistical issue where I couldn't actually find the episode at first. And then I started reading every review that I could of the episode, because I've been an uber Star Trek nerd since I was 9 in 1991. That's when I first started watching Star Trek. So one, I couldn't find it anywhere, so I couldn't actually see it. But two, after reading all the reviews, and let's remember, back in the day, 15 years ago, all of the reviews of These Are The Voyages and the fan reactions on message boards and all over the internet were overwhelmingly negative, right? Overwhelmingly negative. And I just, honestly, Lee, I just felt that I was kind of in denial of Star Trek being off the air, because since I started watching the show since I was 9, and at that point I was 22 years of age, Star Trek was always on the air. So it was like a combination of the original logistical issues of not being able to find it anywhere, then compounded by the fact that all the reviews were not just negative, but really negative, right? And also the fan reaction was not positive. And this little bit of denial of Star Trek being over. Remember, 2005, Enterprise was over. There was not another show. We had gotten TNG, followed by DS9, followed by Voyager, followed by Enterprise. There had been, there had been really kind of 4 or 5 movies in that time. So there was no new Star Trek. That was it. It felt the end of an era, and it was the end of an era. You kind of had you had the show in the 60s and reruns in the 70s. You had the films in the 80s, and then kind of that Berman era of Star Trek, and it was done. That was it. And so a combination of that, the original logistical problems, all the negative reviews, and my own kind of denial of Star Trek coming to an end, and I just never watched it. And to your point, I have seen, there are episodes of Star Trek that, hand on my heart, I have seen 50 times. That's not a joke, right? I think of episodes like Sins of the Father, which is one of my all-time favorites of TNG, and it was one of the only videotapes that I had available to me in one summer, so I watched like 20 times in the summer. Like, there are episodes of Star Trek I've legitimate seen dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I've seen every single episode at least once, if not more, like 2 or 3, 10 times, and I just never got around to it. And then it became this thing. And then when Star Trek was on demand for me, and now that I have all of those, 700 plus episodes on demand, especially I live in the UK like you do, so they're all on Netflix, right? Except for Picard, which is on Amazon Prime. But I have access to every single movie and every single episode of Star Trek from a couple of clicks away. It just became this thing, and I've never watched it.
You obviously had read the reviews. Are you in a bubble about what the episode involves?
No. I know everything.
Everything.
No, I know absolutely everything that happens. And I like Enterprise a lot. I'm a big fan of Enterprise. It's not that same level of comfort food because it came at a different time in my life. Enterprise premiered when I was a freshman in college and uni, my first year. So I was older when Enterprise premiered. So it doesn't have that same kind of nostalgia element that TNG, DS9, or Voyager have for me, or the original series movies. But I love Enterprise. I think Enterprise it's a shame that Enterprise didn't have its 7 seasons or it didn't get to spread its wings beyond 98 episodes, because I think Enterprise has so much charm, and it's so wonderful. I think Scott Bakula is amazing. Jolene is phenomenal as T'Pol. I think there's so much charm and so much like wonderful elements of Enterprise. So that was it. I've just never seen it.
So how do you feel? Like, I pitched this to you because I remember listening to a podcast last year where you had talked about that you hadn't watched this episode, and I think it was just one of these lockdown days. I was like, I wonder if Carlos, if we made it like an event, a podcast, something would kind of consider it. When I kind of pitched that idea to you, were you nervous about kind of finally completing Star Trek, or was it a thing of like, it's time to kind of dive in?
All of the above. I have to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous. There's always been this thing of I've watched all of Star Trek, asterisk, except for the last, the series finale of Enterprise. I'm into it though. I think it's time. I need to go through this. It isn't just, I have to do it. At some point I have to do it. And the reality of it is that I love Enterprise. I love Riker. I love, Troy in a post-Picard world when you kind of have arguably the best Troy performance and the best Marina, one of the best Marina performances of her Star Trek career, and one of the best Troy episodes ever. I think I need to do this. And so when you first asked me, I was very hesitant at first. I'm not, and me, I'm not shy, I'm not hesitant, I'm a very decisive person. But I hesitated. I was like, oh shit, am I gonna do this? And to be honest, if I'm gonna pop this cherry, I might as well do it with you, Lee. Let's be honest.
Sounds good to me. So let's dive into it. So we're going to watch this episode and then we'll come back and talk about it. So you can watch this episode on Netflix or CBS All Access, or if you're just wanting to listen along, listen to Carlos potentially have a euphoric moment, or actually go through hell. These Are The Voyages is written and directed by Brandon Braga and Rick Berman, and it's about William Riker on the Enterprise D on the holodeck as he observes a simulation of the final mission of the original Starship Enterprise as commanded by Jonathan Archer in the days immediately preceding the birth of the United Federation of Planets over 2 centuries earlier.
Let's do it.
Later tonight,
just beyond the next planet, just beyond the next star.
the last hour, the last episode ever, one incredible goodbye.
Been a hell of a run.
I believe I'm going to miss you.
As distant future generations look back
Rig was bigger than this.
A lot of things change in 200 years.
on her last heroic missions,
How many died?
71.
her journey ends where the Federation begins.
Here's to the next generation.
Star Trek Enterprise, the final episode. UPN tonight at 9, 8 Central.
So we're back, and you can now call yourself a Star Trek completionist, Carlos. How does it feel after you're one of the biggest Star Trek fans I know? You can finally say you've seen every single minute of Star Trek.
You know, it feels, I gotta be honest, it feels a little odd. I've had this thing for 15 years, and I felt so odd is the way to put it. I felt like a certain sense of loss, if that's weird. That this thing is now done. I've been like I said earlier, it's been 15. I've been holding off watching this episode for 15 years for the reasons I outlined, and now that's gone. And I'm glad on the one hand that I can say I've watched every episode of Star Trek. And my wife was asking me if I had seen. She asked me if I had seen every episode. And I said, yes. There's many episodes of the original series that I know I've only ever seen once, There's probably, I don't know, a handful of Voyager episodes I've only seen once or twice. But this was truly it. This was the one episode of Star Trek, particularly of my era of Star Trek, when I was a kid, that I hadn't watched. And so it feels a little odd.
It's quite funny, like you posted the other day on Twitter that you had kind of finally watched this episode, and it seemed like a lot of people got into your mentions kind of like, wow, that you finally watched it, kind of curious to hear your kind of reactions. What is it you think about this idea that, someone like yourself has had this one episode that they hadn't seen, and especially this episode that people are kind of curious to hear your take on it? It's not like you've gone, hey, I finally watched Basics Part 2 or the, looking for the Parmac in all the right places. Do you think you would have got the same reaction if that was the one kind of missing episode that you hadn't seen and it wasn't sort of the Enterprise finale, which has kind of become quite infamous?
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I think had it been like a random episode of Voyager or even DS9, nobody would have cared. It is because it's such an infamous, divisive, right? That's the word I'm looking for. Episode, why people kind of cared. And, and I've mentioned, I think all of you and all my other fellow geeky Trek friends on Twitter and other podcasts that I've been on, whether it's Trek Ranks or Trek Profiles, or even, I'm sure I've mentioned it with Duncan as well, it is the one episode that I haven't seen, but because the episode is the Enterprise finale, because it's so infamous, I think, it sparks more interest than had it been a Basics Part 2.
So, before we kind of dive into your thoughts on the episode, I'm always a fan of finding out how people met something. How did you sit down and watch this last episode that you needed to kind of watch? Was it sort of Netflix? Was it the kids are kind of fast asleep? Or was it, right, I'm just going to have it on the computer because I'm so busy? How did you spend that 44 minutes with this episode?
Geez, I wish I could tell you that it was like a story worthy of a Klingon opera or two, but it was not. The kids were asleep. I had a gin and tonic. My wife had made amazing homemade tiramisu, and it was the first time making it, and it turned out amazing. I love crap tiramisu, so when it's great tiramisu, I will eat an entire tray. It was Sunday night. The kids were asleep. I had this, like I said, I had tiramisu and a gin and tonic, and I was like, let's do this. And my wife was nowhere in the room. And so I was by myself, very low key. I had to be honest, and I pushed off this recording, partly because the reality of it is that I was busy, but also I had not watched it, so I was pushing it off. And finally I bit the bullet on Sunday night, and that was it. And so I was on the couch. It was, I'm still on Sky, still in lockdown, and it was just Netflix. And I had done a season 4 rewatch of Enterprise maybe 6 months ago, very low key, just maybe one episode a night over the course of maybe 2 months, not every night type of thing. And so the very next episode for me to watch was These Are the Voyages. So it was already all primed and ready, so Netflix was just come on, what are you waiting for? Let's do this thing. And so yeah, it wasn't anything grand at all.
Before we kind of dive deeper into sort of your thoughts and on this episode, what was sort of your initial kind of reaction? Was it something you thought, okay, that's an episode, or was it shock, horror, mild amusement, enjoyment? How did you sort of come out of that 44 minutes?
Well, it's funny. I definitely felt like, wow, that was definitely an episode of Star Trek Enterprise. I don't know, I feel like I came to the episode already having made peace with it. And that sounds odd because I hadn't seen it. But I had read and obviously heard so much over the years about this episode, whether it was on Twitter or like old Star Trek sites or reviews. So like I knew what I was in for. I had no surprises. I had seen little clips here and there. So there was really no surprises for me. That's not fair. There were one or two tiny details which I smiled at, which I thought were fabulous, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. But like I knew I wasn't predisposed to like love it. So my expectations were very, very low. I enjoyed elements of it. I have to be honest, I really admired, I should say, what they were trying to go for. I mean, I think they failed spectacularly, don't get me wrong. But I like, they approached it with a certain level of like, there was like a romantic element of what they were trying to do, tying up, an entire era of Star Trek, like the Berman era of Star Trek, and they were trying to tie it up quite nicely. And so I responded to that quite well, and I thought that parts of it were very melancholy and nice, and so, there were moments in the show that I really enjoyed. But I definitely did not think that it was a great hour of television, much less a great hour of Star Trek.
This episode is obviously spoken about as one of the worst, and I kind of went to Jim Moorhouse's Trek ranks to see where he had rated it on it. So this one comes 73 out of 97 in Star Trek Enterprise for his ranks rating. Let's kind of start on a positive kind of note. What were some of your, highlights of the episode? Maybe good moments, little beats that made you go, I like this. This has some, merit to it, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that there were quite a few, actually. So again, I thought the idea behind the episode, not the execution, but I thought the idea I could get behind. I thought that the idea of doing an episode of Enterprise, but looking back on it from an episode of Next Generation, was quite clever and quite fun. And so I did enjoy the concept, and I did quite a bit of reading in preparation for our chat, but post watching it. Where you read that Brannon was like, has apologized multiple times over the years for the episode. Berman has said a thing or two. Apparently, according to a source on Memory Alpha, it was the only time that Scott Bakula was ever seen angry on the set was during the filming of this episode, because he thought that they were being shortchanged. So yeah, I think the concept of it had a lot of merit, and I enjoyed that. I thought that the recreation of the Enterprise D, for the most part, was fabulous. I really did. Particularly, and this is one of the details that that as a real fan of the show, or not a real fan, but as like a long time fan of Next Generation, I just loved in that when they're in 10 Forward at the beginning, one of the background actors from TNG was there that you would always see in the background and things like 10 Forward. So I thought that was a phenomenal touch. Apparently he has a name which I can't remember, but he was the stand-in for Mayweather. So it was just nice to have him back, and like it was really nice. I thought that the recreation of the D for the most part was done very well. I thought the Archer to Paul scene, where Archer hugs to Paul right before he goes out to give his speech, was a beautiful little scene, even if it only lasted 1 minute. I thought his dress uniform that he wore was phenomenal looking. I thought he looked great. I thought Phlox was great in that sequence. I really enjoyed the scenes with Chef, with Chef. I thought that those were really well done. I thought he, obviously the whole joke is that he's there and you never see him, etc., etc., etc. And then when you do finally see him, it's Riker, interacting with each member of the crew. And so I thought that every single scene with Riker as the chef, interacting with the various members of the crew and kind of being a quasi therapist, I thought was really neat and a nice way of doing it. Because had the show continued, you would never have actually seen the real chef, which I thought was still a clever way of doing it. So, it wasn't like a total car wreck or anything. It's not, it's not Sub Rosa or anything. But at the same time, it's just not very good. But anyway, we'll get on to that. But so there were definitely things that I enjoyed. I thought the epilogue with the three Enterprises, and I had seen that many times over the years on YouTube and on Twitter and things like that. So I knew that it was coming. But actually to see it within the context of the show was just so beautifully done. And the transition from the Enterprise D to the original to the NX-01, and with Picard, Kirk, and now Archer doing the famous voiceover, was just a very beautiful last shot and last way of last shot, but also way of ending that kind of Valentine to the fans that they were, the concept that they were kind of going for.
The one thing I will dispute with you there, the one thing it really bothered me, and I'd forgot it was always an issue for me when I watched this episode, was when you sort of see 10 Forward, like bizarrely they have someone in sort of the season 1 and 2 like Next Generation uniform, and it's like, it's season 7, what are you doing? How have you kind of got someone in that uniform? It's just that little one thing that just slightly bugs me about the recreation of the D. Just a total annoying little Star Trek nerd.
Oh, no, I get that, but I looked into this because I was also annoyed, right, by the season 1 and 2 uniforms. But because apparently the opening shot of that was, they were filmed against a blue screen, and the opening shot was an establishing shot of 10 Forward from a season 3 episode of TNG, right? That they inserted the back Marina Sirtis and Jonathan Frakes and the background characters into, right?
Oh yeah, I've heard this before. I can't believe that slipped my mind.
So the reason you see 2 or 3 people in season 1 and season 2 uniforms is because, obviously, as we all know, in season 3 they were going through that transition, and a lot of the background actors didn't have the new uniforms. So that's the reason why you see, because the moment I saw that, it's the episode is Menage a Troy, and actually apparently someone pointed out that if you look in for a second in the shot, you actually see Troy, but not in her uniform, in a scene from that episode. You see the back of Troy. So obviously no one would really have noticed except like an uber Star Trek nerd. But that's the reason. But I noticed that too. The one thing that did annoy me about the D is that obviously they had gotten rid of and destroyed all of the ships in the observation lounge. So the new background that they chose for the observation lounge I thought was very odd.
Yeah, it's just little things like that can take you out of it. But, we've maybe looked at some of the positives here. What were some of the bad choices in this episode for you personally?
So, obviously I knew you were going to ask me this question. So I kind of divided my bad choices into just bad choices, unfortunate choices, and then truly ugly choices, right? So for some of the ugly stuff, and I mean, for some
this is like your airing of grievances.
Yeah, it is.
This is your tribute to Jerry Stiller,
exactly.
George Costanza's
family. 100%, the airing of grievances. You and me, 100%. It's I think it's fitting. It's also fitting that this is the 15th. That it was this week that it's the 15th anniversary of this episode. So it is the airing of grievances, and I appreciate you for letting me, and I appreciate the fact that you're letting me do this. I really think, and it's interesting because I'm watching this episode in a post-Picard, post-Nepenthe world, right? And I have never been a massive fan of Troy as a character. I think Marina's a laugh. I think she's great. She's a phenomenal conventionist. But the character of Troy has never been my favorite. However, I thought that her and Riker in Picard were amazing. I thought the character of Troy, it was the best she'd ever been. So, and she looked fantastic. Yeah, she looks age appropriate, but I thought she looked great in Picard. I thought Riker looked great. So, I'm watching this, and I think that Riker and Troy look better now than they did, 15 years ago in those episodes. those episodes are way too tight on both of them, right? They're just not, they're not the right size. They make them, they look like they were vacuum sealed in them. You know, Marina's hair, there's like a whole thing that you can find out about, like, they couldn't find the right wig, and so her hair looks pretty different than she did in the 7th season of TNG. So, like, I think they themselves, again, particularly in a post-Nepenthe world that in which I saw this episode in, I thought they looked terrible. I really did. And I love Riker. Riker's always been one of my favorite characters. And like I said, I think Troy and Riker in Picard were, you know, they weren't just great. They were, you know, they moved me, and they moved all of us. So to kind of have them in this episode looking so bad and kind of, you know, it just didn't work for me. It just didn't work. I think, speaking of kind of that, I think that some of the CGI of the Enterprise D looked pretty bad. I think that the last shot, the epilogue shot, it looks great, but I think there was a couple of really clunky shots of the D that I didn't really appreciate. I thought that there's like a scene where where it's at warp and it just looks off. It looks weird to me. So there were a couple of things like that. I thought the Trip death scene, I knew it was coming. I knew it happened. I just, honestly, like, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. It seems really rushed, unnecessarily so. I'm not against killing a main character, especially, but it's got to be done well. You know, it's got to be done. The way you kill Jadzia or even Tasha. You know, it's got to be done well, and I just think that it was rushed. You know, how did they make a whole they make a whole thing about how these random looking aliens, which you've never seen before, that all of a sudden have Shran's child, have a ship that can only go warp 2 or whatever. Like, it's like, I don't understand why they would put that into the script and then all of a sudden have these guys catch up to them. Not only just catch up to them, but actually board the ship. So it's just very weird and very rushed, and it didn't need to happen. It just seemed unnecessary for kind of dramatic effect. Ooh, let's kill Trip for the sake of killing Trip. So, yeah, I just, like, they were, you know, between the way Riker and Troy looked, between how the Enterprise D herself looked, and that kind of rushing to kill Trip, because you could just tell that they wanted to kind of have some kind of emotional gut punch for the audience, just didn't work at all.
I totally agree. I've never found the death scene any sort of quality as well, because such weird aliens, and it feels like, where's the security on the ship? Or it's just little things where you think, this is what you went with. Like, hey guys, why don't you come with me and I'm going to blow us up, sort of like almost suicide bomb myself. It just feels like there could have been something so much more exciting than could be done. It just felt like the worst possible idea. If you're going to do something like that, I would rather see Captain Kirk shot in the back, than something like this. It feels like one of those ones, as you say, sort of like they want to just rush it for the gut punch. It just feels such a unnecessary kind of moment to have. It's that kind of crap idea that, to have a big finale, you've got to kill someone. It can be done quite well. I think of something like the Anya death in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, whereas this is just, you rank and going like, why? And there's no good can come of it. But
it was odd because also I think that had they done away with the scene, like with the line that said that these guys had a shuttle that could only go warp 2, had they done away with that, and had they would have included a scene with a couple of Makos like getting shot down by these guys, right? You could have gotten away with a lot more of it, and then all of a sudden, I didn't understand why Trip needed to kind of basically put himself in a situation where he knew, where he needed to commit suicide in order to take these guys down. You could have easily had him take these guys down and had one of the guys survive and then have that guy blow themselves up. It just didn't. It seemed out of character. It seemed unnecessary. But on top of that, I feel like with very small tweaks, all of which would have been done in budget, all of which could have been done as part of the story, very small changes, you could have gotten not totally away with it, but much more away with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, I think the episode would have been all the richer for not having kind of done that. It feels like the one thing that sort of breaks the camel's back in terms of, you know, what could have been just an average or mediocre kind of finale to one where it's just like, oh, this is just a really terrible idea kind of mixed in. It feels like, you know, really disappointing. And I know that they said if they had come back for a fifth season, they would have found a way sort of out of it. And that I think Trek Core posted last week that if you read the relaunch novels, that it's kind of a part of like some sort of, you know, undercover operation where he's off to sort of Section 31, so he kind of fakes his own death or something along those lines. But ultimately, I'm kind of strictly of the TV canon world, and I just think that's probably one of the kind of weakest Trek moments ever, and an end to such a really disappointing and a really enjoyable and charismatic character.
Yeah, totally. The thing is, I like Trip. You know, I don't think that Trip is in my top 10 favorite like characters of Star Trek, but, you know, I have come to really love Enterprise over the years. It wasn't, I watched it live, except for the last season because I had moved to London. But the first 3 seasons, you know, I watched live on UPN. You know, I would make all my, I had, especially I think the 3rd season, I had like a common area in college, and I would make all of my suite mates, like they all knew that like whatever it was, Wednesday nights at 8:00, that nobody was allowed to talk. And, you know, I got along really well with all of them, but it was like, you know, I would make them either all watch or they all have to be out of the room. So like I watched it live, and I've come to appreciate and love Enterprise for what it is as time goes by. I think Archer's a good captain. I think Scott Bakula has, you know, tons of charm. I love T'Pol and Phlox. I think both of those characters, they do not get the credit that they're due. I think they're the actors, the characters, I think they're great. And there's a lot to love in Enterprise. There's great episodes. You know, it's clunkier. There's a lot more competition. They slashed the budget. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that contributed to the show. But I think it works. I think the show works, and the show gets better and better. So to kind of have that as the ending, one of the things that really bothered me about it is that it meant that Enterprise never got a send-off, right? It just didn't. I feel like now, like Enterprise, you know, I talk about now being you said that now I'm a completist, right? I've now watched every episode of Star Trek that there's been, but I now oddly feel one thing that I never felt before was that I now really feel that Enterprise just finished as opposed to it being wrapped up, right? Had this episode existed, even if they didn't change anything, had this episode been the second to last episode of Enterprise, and then they would have gotten their 2 hour, you know, Star Trek style big bang finale. One, it would have rounded up Enterprise as having been, rather than 98 episodes, a nice even 100, right? But it would have it wouldn't have left a bad taste in your mouth, right? This episode has nothing to do with the Enterprise crew. This is an episode about Riker. It's not even about Troy. It's about Riker trying to make a decision. And he goes into like a really weird holodeck program to try to figure out what can help him, right? But had that been the second to last episode, and that would have been this like kind of clunky Valentine, which is the word that Berman and Bragan kept using back in the day, to the fans, yeah, it would have been clunky, but nobody would have thought much of it, because then you would have gotten the series finale, right? But because it's heralded as a series finale, and yet it has nothing to do with the Enterprise crew, and to add insult to injury, it's not even the Enterprise crew, their holodeck recreation. You don't ever see any of the real characters in this episode. They're all holodeck, you know, they're all photons and force fields on the Enterprise D holodeck. So it really feels like the show never had a chance to finish. It really feels like Enterprise didn't, you know, I'm sad that it didn't get an epic send-off the way TNG, DS9, and Voyager did. And I'm kind of, you know, I think it's a shame that that again, the episode had nothing to do with the crew, and then it just Enterprise seems unfinished.
There's always the thing where I suppose it's probably what you've kind of done for the past 15 years, really. Well, I suppose more than that now, is that this is an episode that people go, okay, we're kind of going to ignore this, and Terror Prime and Demons is the perfect finale and send off for this crew. It has the emotional beats and moments, and this is some sort of like Frankenstein's monster episode that we're just going to pretend doesn't exist and isn't the real finale.
Yeah, totally. But I get it. But then I think Demons and Terror Prime are very, they're fine episodes. They're not my favorite episodes of season 4, and they're episodes, they're phenomenal episodes of season 4. But that's not fulfilling to me. Those episodes are not, they're like filler episodes. Yeah, they're good, and they continue the story of like xenophobia on Earth, and what's his name? Paxton is what's his name? Who's the bad guy in Terror Prime? RoboCop.
Peter Weller.
Peter Weller. Peter Weller is great in those episodes, and notice that I said RoboCop and not Star Trek Into Darkness. Talk about something else that I've also scrubbed from the record. But that's a topic for another podcast, my friend. I find it really. It's just a shame because the show was a good show. Is it DS9? Is it TNG? No. Is it Voyager? No. But it's a good show, and had it had 7 seasons, the show would have continued to get better and better and better. And yeah, I just think it's. I look back on it now with like a little bit of, I guess, melancholy. I think it's just a little bit sad that that's how it was ended.
One thing that I think really frustrates me with the finale is that Manny Koto really stepped up in season 4, sort of became the showrunner, key writer, and then sort of for this finale, he's sort of like pushed to one side, and Bragan and Berman return, who, as far back as sort of the end of season 2, started to kind of pull back from their involvement, but never managed to sort of stay away from the finales and sort of we want to do the big kind of closing episode. I would love to have seen, a final episode kind of written by Manny Koto. That would have been, I think, more rewarding. I think he proved himself to sort of be the better writer for that series.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, I was thinking because, there is that scene where Manny is in the episode as an admiral, like sitting behind like Reed or Hoshi, right, in as spectators. And yeah, it is a shame. I think that, had they made some tweaks and had this episode been the second to last episode with a proper, we wouldn't be talking, right? I would have watched it years ago. It would have been wonderful. Again, a little bit clunky because it's got some really weird pacing and very rushed. But it would have been fine, and it would have been a nice thing. But then the Enterprise crew would have gotten their proper send-off, right?
With this kind of episode as well, I think what frustrates me most as well was I think back to sort of 2005. I was born in 1987, and I lived through, even though I didn't become like a fan till I was like 6 or 7, when I sort of started beginning to watch Trek, I kind of lived through a period where Star Trek was constantly on the TV. There was never no Star Trek. I remember sort of when this finale was announced in sort of 2005 of like, oh, this is the end of a generation for me. And it was quite an emotional moment. What did it feel like for you as a sort of a fan when the news kind of kicked in 2005 that this was going to be the end of Star Trek? We'd hoped it would return. It was going to take a good few years before it did come back, especially for sort of the TV audiences. How did you sort of feel in 2005? Was it an emotional one for you?
Yeah, it was really emotional. In fact, I can tell you exactly where I was. My wife and I, my then girlfriend, took our first weekend trip away, and we were living in London, and for her birthday / Valentine's Day, so she was her birthday is the day after Valentine's Day, I had gotten us, I'm talking back in the day when it was £1 flights on EasyJet or whatever it was, Ryanair, from London to Venice, right? So we were in Venice for 3 days, staying at some horrible little hotel, but we were having this amazing time. It was pre-iPhones. I needed to check in something for school, so I went into an internet cafe off some street, off some canal, no joke, in Venice. And I checked my email, and back in the day, you used to have to pay for 15 or 30 minutes. So I wanted to get my full 15 or 30 minutes worth. So I logged on to Yahoo Mail back in the day, and I checked my email, nothing. And then I logged out of Yahoo Mail, and it used to take you to the Yahoo homepage. And like right there on the Yahoo homepage was a picture of, and I know exactly what picture it was. I can see it in my mind's eye. It was a picture of the crew, of the Enterprise crew from season 3, with T'Pol wearing her like kick-ass red outfit on the bridge, like the cast promo picture for season 3, and it said Enterprise canceled, and that was just the whole story. So I clicked on it. I read the story, and it was basically how Enterprise had been canceled, and how it was the first time in like 17 years that there would be no new Star Trek show, and that no other shows or movies were in development. And it really hit me. I was like, because I'm a little bit. I was born in 1982, so I'm a little bit older than you. But I came into Star Trek in December of 1991 when I kind of watched the Undiscovered Country. That's another story. That's what introduced me into Star Trek, which was around the 5th season of TNG. So from the point that I was 8 or 9 years old, there had always been Star Trek in my life, and I wasn't. When I fell in love with Star Trek, I went from not knowing anything about Star Trek to being obsessed overnight, and that obsession has continued 30 years later, right? So I was floored. I was sad. I was with my girl, with my girlfriend. We had been dating. I think we had been dating for about 3 months, and it was our first like getaway. So I couldn't have been that sad, but it definitely hit me. And here I am, 15 years later, telling you exactly where I was when I found the news. So it definitely impacted me.
I remembered where I found out the news. Like, it was the days, and I still miss it because it was like the go-to place before Twitter ever existed, and that was like the old Trek BBS boards. Yeah. I remember just going on there. Like, I was in 6th year at the time, so my last year at high school. I remember sort of reading the news and just being sort of floor punched by it. Just, oh my god, no more Star Trek, nothing to look forward to on TV in the coming weeks and months. It was just surreal. And I remember sort of me and my mate used to go out. We lived in the countryside, and we would sort of just like go out together, like go walk through the woods or the countryside. And what we would do, we would just listen to our own music, like our big CD Walkmans, just enjoy each other's company, but just while we're listening to music. I remember just sort of like, it was a really dark night, and just like walking through the kind of, there's these woods, just thinking like, no Star Trek. And it's crazy these days where, since we recorded the first part, Strange New Worlds has been announced. Everything is continuing to progress with new seasons of Discovery, Picard, and it's just crazy to think it's back, and it's back with a bang. And it felt like that day in sort of 2005 that, wow, like, will it ever come back? It's crazy how far we've come since then.
No, it is absolutely. And this is the same weekend, to your point, that we found out about Strange New Worlds, which, by the way, I think is an amazing title for a Star Trek show. Right? I just think it's phenomenal. So yeah, we are. It is amazing how in all of this, history repeats itself. There will be a day within our lifetimes in the not too distant future where Star Trek is off the air again, right? And then someone will revive it. Star Trek is cyclical. It's like everything else. There will be several more incarnations of it, and then it'll go away for a while, and then someone will bring it back. That's just the way it's going to be forever. And yeah, and it is. We are living in a. My best friend Steven and I co-wrote an article for Trek News, when before Discovery aired, where we talked about whether or not Discovery could usher in a new golden era of Star Trek, right? And here we are. It is a new golden era of Star Trek. I really enjoy Disco. There's a lot of things that I love about the show. I don't revisit Disco. It's not my favorite Star Trek show. I love Picard. I'm infinitely more excited about Strange New Worlds than I am about Disco Season 3. In large part because my favorite things about Disco Season 2 all had to do with Pike and the Enterprise, right? So I'm excited. I'm really excited. But, aren't we lucky that we get to live in an era where there is Picard Season 2, Disco Season 3, the launch of Strange New Worlds, the launch of Lower Decks, the launch of the Nickelodeon show, Section 31 at some point in the future, and apparently there's another show that no one's talked about yet. So it's amazing to be here, especially when we're talking about being 15 years ago, whether it was, you or me kind of finding out these news. It's just amazing.
I suppose one thing we should probably touch on is, and you talk about revisiting, is I considered sort of the Pegasus episode one of the all-time great Next Generation episodes. When you watched this episode, did you feel convinced to sort of go back and revisit Pegasus, sort of see how it all stitched together, or did you feel like they had done a dirty on Pegasus, potentially sort of tainting it with this episode?
I agree with you that the Pegasus is one of the greatest hours of Next Generation. It's definitely one of the greatest hours, and I don't think anybody would disagree, of Season 7 of TNG. It's phenomenal, right? I felt this episode didn't cheapen it for me, but it certainly didn't add anything to it, right? Like a lot of people have complained that it doesn't really quite match up. Like, when would he have done this? And if this finale was really, what occurred in this episode was really what it took for him to kind of convince himself that he needed to tell Picard what Pressman was doing. I mean, fine. It just doesn't really match up. I almost wish this would have been, honestly, just like on a down day at the Enterprise, right? I don't think that they needed to tie it into Pegasus at all. I think that it would have been nice for them just to be like, hey, Deanna, I just started playing around with a program I found which is all about the NX-01. Like, I think that would have been better. I feel like them trying to shoehorn this into a great hour of TNG just didn't work at all.
It also has that annoying thing that I hate in sort of TV, is when people are constantly telling you how great and heroic people were and telling you about people's actions, where it feels like every bit of dialogue Troy has is always like, yeah, like this Enterprise crew, you want to skip ahead, they've got something heroic coming up, or, I wish you could tell them how huge an impact these people would go on to have. I would rather see those things, whether it's sort of a bit of a montage of kind of the Enterprise's next few years or something, as opposed to sort of just being told constantly how great and wonderful the Enterprise crew is. We've been with them for 4 years now, we've seen them on these adventures. We don't sort of need it to be constantly sort of like, oh, we've kind of shoehorned in this prequel series, but we definitely need to big up like how great and influential they were onto all these future characters that never ever mentioned them, or let alone had their ship in sort of like a conference lounge setting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, at one point I thought that line where Riker is talking to Troy about Reed, and then Troy says, yeah, it's hard to imagine these like larger than life characters. And I'm like, that first and foremost, like, at least say it about Archer. You know what I mean? Like, don't say it about Reed. I am not a Reed. I know a lot of people are Reed haters. I'm not a Reed hater, but I don't think about Reed. Reed doesn't even register when I think about my favorite Star Trek characters. He doesn't, He's such a non-character for me in so many respects. He could have been interesting, but no. And so yeah, I agree with you. I think that was really odd. I think the only thing that worked, the only thing that felt natural and in character, because this is the other thing, had it been Data, it would have been different, because he's an encyclopedia, right? Like, he would have been able to kind of talk about facts, and that made sense. But for Troy to know those random facts about, it's just not in character for Troy, one. And two, what was in character for Troy was when she says that she had visited the ship to some museum, but she really couldn't remember because all those museum ships all seemed the same to her. That was very much in character,
Star Trek always seems to have a habit of talking about things where it's like when they insert something into the history of going, hey, we saw it at a museum or something like that. Yeah. I think they obviously did with Zephyr Cochrane and stuff like that when they fleshed out that period. Everything's always in a museum. Yeah,
Voyager's in a museum. How big is that museum?
It's got to be some sort of space museum or something like that, surely.
It would have been, I think, I hadn't really thought about that, but had they not jammed it into the Pegasus, it would have just been like a down day on the Enterprise, and maybe they were like going to go pick up Preston, like so that you could time it exactly when it was, right? But it just didn't need to be like, it's just such an odd thing for Riker to choose this to follow the NX-01 crew to help him make a decision as to whether or not he should talk to Picard. Honestly, it should have just been really simple. It should have been Riker and Troy on the Enterprise D, Riker telling her, hey, I started playing around with this, I wanted to learn how to cook better, and I started playing around, and I stumbled across this chef program that actually takes place on the NX-01. Join me. Like, it just would have been, it just would have been better.
So what are your kind of final thoughts on this episode, and sort of looking back now that you're a completionist? Has that 44 minutes changed your opinion at all on this huge franchise? And do you kind of wake up any differently now, feeling that you are, now that you're a completionist?
It doesn't change anything, right? I love Star Trek unconditionally, right? But within my unconditional love for Star Trek, I put Star Trek episodes and movies in buckets, right? I have no qualms whatsoever about watching an episode once and barely or never revisiting ever again if I don't like it, right? You and I spent an entire episode talking about Voyager. Now, do I love Star Trek Voyager? Sure, I love Star Trek Voyager. But Star Trek Voyager is not my favorite Star Trek. When I watch Star Trek Voyager, and I watch a lot of Voyager, right? I watch 40 episodes, full stop, right? Rarely do I go out of those 40, maybe 50 episodes. Very rarely, right? A couple of months back, I found myself watching episodes of Voyager that I didn't revisit often, just for novelty. And I was like, nope, I want to stick with my 40 episodes of Voyager, and that's it, right? So I love Star Trek unconditionally. I've watched every episode of Star Trek, every movie of Star Trek. But for example, I have watched Star Trek Into Darkness twice. And maybe this is another podcast that we can do. But I have not watched Star Trek Into Darkness since the second time I saw it in theaters. I just haven't. I thought I hated everything about that movie. Not everything. There's some things I liked about it, but I thought it was so. I thought it undid so spectacularly all of the goodwill that they had earned in the first movie. Speaking of Nicholas Meyer, and to plug an episode, your podcast with Nicholas Meyer, I know you didn't talk about him. You didn't talk to him about this, but I love that your chat with Nicholas Meyer is one of my favorite interviews you've ever done. And I heard him speak about Star Trek Into Darkness at a Star Trek convention, and he was angry. He was obviously he's a very opinionated man. And rightly so, and he's earned it, right? And he's smart and he's articulate, and he was angry. He was like that. He said something like, "That shit movie where JJ stole all of my ideas and turned them upside down and made them worse." Something like it was like literally something to that effect, right? And I was like, he's not wrong. But so going back to your question, I can compartmentalize Star Trek very easily in my mind, right? I love TNG, I love DS9, I love Voyager, I love it all. But, if I'm going to revisit things, I'm only going to revisit the episodes that bring me joy and the episodes that I really love, right? Now, when it comes to Deep Space Nine, that's basically like 160 of the 170 episodes, right? Or the 100, whatever, however many episodes there are. TNG, probably 120 of the 170. But when it comes to Enterprise, it's just kind of like Voyager. I love it. I think it's great. I think it's fun. But, this doesn't impact my love for the show. It doesn't impact my love for the franchise. And I'm sure there will be a series with so many series coming up that I'm just not going to care for so much. So, yeah, I'll watch episodes when they air, but I'll never revisit them.
I think it was maybe Trek Geeks or someone like that came out with this wonderful quote, which I think is true even about this episode, which we've spent nearly an hour talking about, which is like, all Star Trek is above average. And like, even sort of the worst episodes of Voyager or Enterprise or even Deep Space Nine I'll probably maybe watch once or twice, perhaps more, over a lifetime than I would any other show that I thought an episode was terrible on it. You know, with lockdown, I find myself randomly going, you know what? I've watched so many Star Trek episodes repeatedly. I'm going to dive into some of the season 7 episodes of Voyager, kind of give them a kind of go. Just try and get my head into the mentality of like, right, what was going on here? What was the state of the franchise at the time? And, you know, these are episodes that if it was any other series, perhaps, I wouldn't revisit. But Star Trek has that thing where, again, I think they nailed it. Any sort of episode of Star Trek is above average in one way or another.
I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, you know, to kind of drive that point home, I'm you know, I have 2 8-year-old twins, and thankfully work is really busy right now, and there's a lot going on in my life, and I don't have I don't have a lot of time to watch a ton of television. So when I do have time to watch TV, I rarely want to start a new show. I just want to watch Star Trek. You know, I've never watched, and I know I would love it. Like, I've never watched Breaking Bad. I know I would love it. There's nothing about it that I know I would love it. I haven't watched it. And it's because the commitment seems so great to me, and I have such little time, relatively speaking, that with the time that I have, I just want to watch Star Trek. Or maybe Parks and Rec for, like, the 8,000th time, you know? Like, that's really all I want.
With this kind of, like, now behind you, what is your next thing that you would like to kind of do with? Is there something else out there that's like, whether it's a movie, you know, on Trek related, that you think that's something that I need to kind of overcome and watch? Or do you feel that now that this is behind you, that you're at the end of history, as it were? I'm
at the end of history. It's a very nice way of putting it. Something that Nicholas Meyer would approve of. I feel young. It's funny. I have been watching. So on Saturday nights, I love movies and I love film. On Saturday nights, my wife and I, during lockdown, we have a standing date. We let the kids stay up late on Friday. We put the kids to bed early on Saturdays, and we watch a movie that neither of us had ever seen, but we've wanted to. Right. So the criteria is that neither of us had ever seen it. So last week we watched Hunt for the Wilder People, which I'd always wanted to see. And I loved it. So oh my God. Honestly, if you take anything away from this conversation, forget the stuff about These Are the Voyages. Go watch Hunt for the Wilder People. It was to what you just said, Lee. It was just so good. And I laughed out loud. I cried. It was amazing. We watched Little Women the week before, which we both of us had wanted to see. That was also incredible. I'm a big fan of food. I like to eat, and I like to go to restaurants, and I really enjoy it. It's a big part of my life. And I really my brother's a chef at a very contemporary, very hip restaurant, Japanese fusion restaurant in New York. And so I love Japanese food. So I've been watching a lot of documentaries on food. I finally watched Guido Dreams of Sushi a couple of weeks ago, which I loved. I'm watching one tonight, actually, after this, called Ramen Heads. I've been trying to, for those that follow me on Twitter, I've been trying to cook ramen quite a bit and try to get something that's even remotely passable. So I think I've been trying to revisit some food documentaries that I've been meaning to see, and then watching movies like Little Women, like Hunt for the Wilder People, that my wife and I have never seen.
There's one thing I want to ask about before you leave and so on. While this, due to seamless editing, will look like we had a quick chat and then we dived into this discussion, there's been a kind of couple weeks between the two parts.
Yeah.
In that time, you had an interview with Robert Hewitt Wolf, which was published on StarTrek.com. Can you tell us a little bit about that article? Because I think it's absolutely fantastic. Can you tell us a bit about your experience kind of chatting with Robert and sort of writing another successful article for StarTrek.com?
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I really appreciate that. I'm so glad that you liked it because, obviously I write those kinds of things for people like me and for people like you. So I'm glad you liked it. To be honest, I think you and I talked about this, like using this lockdown, a lot of our favorite behind the scenes people on Star Trek are, either working remotely, and one would think some of them have a little bit more time, Robert and I don't know him personally, really, but Robert and I have been following each other on Twitter for a very long time. I don't even remember how it happened. Like, it's like over a few years. Obviously, I tweet a lot about Star Trek. I tweet a lot about Deep Space Nine, so I'm sure we had some kind of conversation. So we followed each other on Twitter. I had always wanted to write for StarTrek.com, and I had pitched these 2 stories to StarTrek.com. And they wrote me back out of the blue and said, we'd love both of these pitches. Do them for us. So one of them was this like silly, like 10 unexpected Star Trek references article, which is basically, when does Star Trek pop up, in a very unexpected place and it makes you smile. So it was like, you're listening to the Beastie Boys and they talk about, they talk about Mr. Spock, or you're watching Space, or you're watching Gilmore Girls and something pops up like that, right? And Star Trek pops up. The other one was his interview with Robert Wolf. So I wrote him a private message, a DM on Twitter, and I was like, hey man, would you be interested in doing an interview? And honestly, he must have been on Twitter, because he, like, at the exact same time that I sent him, because he wrote back within a minute and he's like, yeah, when do you want to do it? That was that. So then we arranged a date. He said he only had 30 minutes. We ended up talking for almost an hour. We talked about 20 minutes mostly about how, a very American-sounding American from Miami and New York ended up on a Northwest, like, island off the coast of Scotland. We talked, and he had been to Skye, so we talked a lot about that. And then we just really talked. And what was nice was that it was I had my questions, but it was a really free-flowing conversation. So it meant that he was very generous with his answers, and that his answers were very long and in-depth, and I would interrupt him to kind of get him to go down, to give me more detail about something, because to him, it was just his job. So he would say something very naturally that I didn't fully understand. So there was a lot there. And then it took me probably 2 weeks, and I missed 2 deadlines for StarTrek.com, which they didn't mind, and they've invited me back to write another article with, hopefully we can get Mike Okuda to talk about his time on Star Trek, which I'll come back to. I don't want to jinx anything just yet, or maybe I just did. We had this wonderful chat. What I loved about chatting with him is that he knows Star Trek. You know what I mean? And that's a silly thing to say for someone that wrote so much Star Trek, but he really knows Star Trek. Right? You talk to him and he will say things about, one of the questions was, what was he most proud of in terms of what he contributed to the show? And, we all know that Ron Moore was the Klingon guy on TNG, and he was kind of the Klingon guy on Deep Space Nine. And Robert is very generous. And he's like, yeah, but, we all wrote together. And even though Ron had built all of this stuff, I then came in and did all the stuff for the Klingons. And then he's like, and basically a lot of the Dominion was him, just kind of thinking what would be cool and what would the Anti-Federation look like. And so to me, what's amazing, like, I love Star Trek actors, and, I've gotten to meet a few of them over the years, like we all have at conventions and things like that, those lucky enough that can go. And I love Star Trek actors, but I really love, like, key behind the scenes Star Trek people. And especially the ones that aren't the obvious ones. Like, I love talking, like, that opportunity with Robert was great. Listening to Nicholas Meyer speak, doing research on Gene Kuhn. I love behind-the-scenes Star Trek so much.
And I feel like it's so underrepresented in sort of podcasts, writing, blogs and stuff. Is like, there's so many times people can go, here's an article about Star Trek. But, like, for me, these are the people that are the rock stars. And I went down, like, a rabbit hole the other day where I would love to, maybe there's something me and you can do, speaking out loud. Ronald D. Moore's time on Voyager is such an interesting little note. Like, I dived into sort of, I don't know why, I'd read it years ago, but I'd sort of read that piece he'd done sort of not long after his departure from Voyager. We talked about, like, what a disaster it was working on there, his expectations for the future of Star Trek, what he thought about working with, like, the team there and so on, what it was like going from Deep Space Nine to Voyager. I mean, I think that is blockbuster stuff, and it's kind of not really spoken about much anymore or kind of looked at. And I just think articles like yourself, kind of, it shines a light on these people that we should never take for granted. It's not just about the cast and the episode, it's about the people that sort of put in the time. And I think the documentary, like What We Left Behind, also kind of shone a great light on these great kind of writers.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I do love, and I think speaking of Trek ranks, I think Trek ranks did one like Star Trek this was years ago. I think Jim did an episode called Star Trek Mount Rushmore or something, and it was like the behind the scenes people of Star Trek. Like if you had, like 4 or 5 people that you would build. And I was thinking about this because actually I'm making as I cook. As I said, I love food. I love to cook. And I've been cooking a lot here because obviously there are no restaurants or deliveries where we are. So every night, either my wife and I cook, and on the weekends, I take the opportunity to really cook something like an hour or two to make. And I have been watching. I saw a tweet that you had sent out 2 months ago, Lee, about how on the American iTunes account, all the 10, like the 6 and 4 Star Trek movies, the non-Kelvin movies, were for like $19 or something, right? So I bought them all, not because I didn't have them, but because I wanted them all digitally for all of the commentaries, right? So I had never listened to any of those commentaries. So I watched, so what I've been doing is I watched the movie and then I watch all the various commentaries. So I listened to all the commentaries for the motion picture. I listened to the commentaries for Wrath of Khan. One of the commentaries, which, speaking of Manny Cotto, was Manny Cotto and Nicholas Meyer together talking about Wrath of Khan, which wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, but they there was some good nuggets. And now I've just listened to Leonard Nimoy talk about Search for Spock, and this one that I'm currently on is Ron Moore and Michael Taylor from Voyager talking about Search for Spock. And these guys, like, yes, William Shatner, Patrick Stewart, all the actors, they bring Star Trek to life. But the people that make Star Trek, to me, like you said, they're rock stars. And I want to like, I'd be infinitely, with the exception of some actors, I would always rather have lunch with, Ira Burr than most Star Trek actors. That's just, that's just me, right?
I should add that anyone that's listening to this on iTunes this week, you can pick up What We Left Behind on digital for $4.99. So if you've not watched it or you want to have it sort of on your digital download so you can watch it anywhere in the world, I would use this as an opportunity to get that film. It is, for $5, is an absolute steal.
It's an absolute steal. And speaking of that, when you and I went to see that at the premiere in Birmingham now, 2 years ago, Lee?
Crazy.
My most memorable part of that weekend was that Ira Burr was in the theater like that, and him and I talked, just the two of us, for like 25 minutes, right?
Yeah, because I remember thinking, where is this guy and stuff like that, and there you are, just like, I just came back chatting with Ira Stephen Bear, and then he sat in front of us, like having little popcorn snacks that his wife or partners kind of brought along, and it's just like, part of you wants to just watch Ira Stephen Bear watching this kind of film.
Totally. But anyways, it was very kind of you that you liked it. I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm touched. And it was just wonderful. I really found him to be generous, a fan, but like a real fan of Star Trek. Like, you could tell that it was obviously, part of him was a job. He needed to do a job, and he worked. All of those guys, there were like 6 of them, and they worked their asses off. I mean, it sounds like he was like, I can't believe we produced 26 hours of television. It just seems insane now, right? But he's a real, genuine fan of Deep Space Nine. He made it. He made it for 5 seasons. He contributed so much to that show. I mean, if he wrote or co-wrote almost 40 episodes. I guarantee you, if you name any of your favorite episodes from seasons 1 to 5, he wrote or co-wrote them. So here I am, he wrote The Die Is Cast, Improbable Cost, Way of the Warrior, The Wire, Past Tense. Like, I mean, this guy was a machine, and he was 27, It's amazing.
I always when I got the chance to interview him, I was like, whenever I saw your name in a title, I thought, oh my God, something big is going to happen in this episode. Like, him and Ira Stephen Bear as a writing partner were like the big dogs.
Amazing. So yeah, I would much rather sit here and, let's do as much research as we can and geek out about Ron Moore's time on Voyager. And let's reach out to him on Twitter and see if he'd be willing to do a podcast.
Sounds good to me. Well, Carlos, thank you so much for joining me. We obviously touched on it there that you've written for StarTrek.com. If people wanted to kind of check out some of your other work or podcast appearances, where would you recommend people check out?
I'm always on Twitter. In addition to Star Trek and food, I love coffee. And so my handle is Double Mac. My go-to is a nice double macchiato. I write as well for Trek News on and off. I love the guys at Trek News. They're wonderful. And I'm geeky enough to be on podcasts like yours or Jim's Trek Ranks or Duncan's Primitive Culture on and off, and pretty regularly. So if you want to find me, I'm around and I'm always geeking out about Star Trek.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Carlos, and I'm sure it won't be long before you're back on again in the future. So thanks very much to everyone for listening at home, and stay safe. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.